Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Some viewers may find the following video disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
What is the worst nightmare you've ever had?
I was engaging in a home tour at a White House in the middle of the countryside with a group. It was an open house meeting. There were a handful of us as well as the receptionist. We would split up then meet together bit by bit. We noticed the receptionist was gone after a while and paid it no mind. The crowd went from 8 to 7 to 6 and we all just assumed it was people leaving the home, uninterested. Some of us seemed upset as the leave was abrupt. I was mainly on my own and just kept noticing the numbers decrease. I got nervous and went to the door only to realize it was locked somehow. The knob would turn but nothing would move. I slowly became quasi-lucid at this point because I realized I was trapped. I tried to find the others, down to 3 now, and everyone is panicking. One leaves on her own, saying she'll check a window only to have her disappear as well. It's just me and another guy. We decide splitting up is impossible now as we head to the only area that hasn't been explored, the attic. The attic room is well lit with beautiful sunlight. Everything in that room is white and you can see the blue sky clearly from behind a row of desiccated dolls. They appeared like mummies, dark and dry. The guy and I knew that these were the remains of the guests almost immediately when we saw the colors match on their clothing. He grabs me in a panic saying, "Please, we have to leave now." Something catches his gaze behind me and immediately he freezes in a form of terror that could only be described as excruciating pain. He twists and contorts, shaking as he throws me to the ground. His flesh begins to shrivel as he screams, becoming desiccated and dry as well. Just another dark mummy-like doll. Only his head is forced off by an unseen force and falls to the ground. I hear them moving behind me, tiptoeing around, meandering as if they were simply engaging their life. I don't need to turn my head as one of them walks to the side in my field of view. As I turn, I see the entity responsible. It is tall, so very tall, a vaguely feminine shadow with living light inside. So many arms, almost like some form of Hindu god with a vengeance. She was puppeteering them all, forcing them to simply go about their day in their newfound hollow state. She looked at me after scanning the room with that enormous, cyclopean, violet eye, and I saw a few of her hands reach out towards me. I was frozen. I couldn't move, yet something wasn't going according to her plan. I could tell immediately she was frustrated with something as the color of her large iris turned from violet to crimson red. Everything was vibrating, shaking with the force of 1,000 low-toned resonances that threatened to sunder me. I couldn't wake up. I knew I was asleep now, but I just couldn't wake up. I focused everything on me I could to defend myself. Whatever mental fortitude that day I retained was on me protecting myself. The mummified puppet stared from a distance, watching as more of her hands tried to reach out and grab me, but she just couldn't. The vibrating sensation got so bad that finally it began to feel painful. That sensation of pain woke me up finally as I jarred awake with a gasp and sweat on my brow. That was probably the strangest of my dreams, I think.
I had an extremely vivid dream which I can still recall in photographic detail years later. It goes like this. I dreamed that I went into the engineering lab at work and one of my coworkers asked if I wanted to go visit the underground lab. In real life, I was working at a big government lab at the time. I asked what it was. He told me it was a massive underground research facility and he could get me clearance. I was interested and said yes. There was a 3 to 4 week time skip of me getting clearance and sailing out across the ocean to an oil rig or something like it. I and the group I am with enter it and take an elevator underneath the ocean, descending miles down into the Earth's crust. We step out into a massive stone dome, at least a mile in diameter, illuminated with hazy artificial lighting simulating the setting sun. It even had cloud systems and you could hardly see the cave's walls through the artificial sky. We were standing at the foot of a massive, opalescent white arcology in the middle of the dome. It reached all the way into the artificial clouds and I couldn't see its top. We went on in and were taken into a guest hosting area. After a time skip involving mundane living activities, one of my group, a pregnant woman, goes missing. I and a few others went looking for her, but after we couldn't find her in the areas we were told we could go, we went into the back areas, deeper into the arcology. She finds us more than we find her, running up to us with this manic look in her eyes. She excitedly clamored about how the scientists had done this wonderful operation on her. She was no longer pregnant, and we eventually figured out that the operation was to remove the baby to do who knows what with. The entire time, she was manic, insisting it was a good thing, asking us to come have an operation too. She eventually runs off, and we find her dead a few minutes later, seemingly spontaneously died. I then wandered off deeper into the archaeology, and the then veneer of human construction I had become familiar with in the guest areas gave way to almost alien metal hallways. I eventually navigated through this to an interior cavity inside the archaeology, emerging into a bombed-out building. The archaeology was large enough to house an entire city inside the cavity, and looking out from the bombed-out windows, I could see buildings made from the strange white stone as the archaeology. Everything suddenly reverted back to its prime, and I saw the city in its lived-in state, but over the course of a few seconds, I watched it decay into the ruins that it was now. I suddenly became very sad and was moved to tears, thinking over and over how many millions died here, knowing a great disaster had happened here. I didn't know what the disaster was, but I somehow knew it was something that had been unleashed. After a few moments, I became incredibly fearful, because I knew that the thing which had killed everyone here was still alive, and it had just spotted me. I had just enough time to look to my left and spot it before I was snatched up in a haze of blue light and ripped out of the dream. Everything went away except the thing. It was a living entity made out of what appeared to be organic stone. It was pyramid-shaped, but missing the keystone. In place of the keystone was a single, flaming eye from which the restraining blue light beamed out onto me. Orbiting it were concentric rings of flaming eyes, all staring at me and through me. I remember saying, "Lord, protect me." It was at this point I woke up for real and opened my eyes. For a few brief moments, my room was bathed in pale blue light. I don't know if it was my phone or something else, but I had this horrifying sensation that something followed me back from the dream. My eyes closed again and the dream continued. I suddenly dropped down a few inches, landing on my feet in the middle of an unimaginably massive cathedral. It suddenly felt warm and extremely safe, and I looked around, taking in the stone columns as large as skyscrapers which supported a vaulted ceiling thousands of feet over my head. I was then whisked away to a room which felt scientific, sterile white walls made of a single, seamless material, some technical-looking equipment. Someone was in there, he was behind me, and he asked me to step up onto a dais in the middle of the room. I did, and he commented, "You shouldn't have gone in there." At the same time I disassociated and watched myself get telekinetically lifted up on the dais. 3 ethereal forms of myself slid out and moved onto adjacent daises. They looked like me, except for one which had been horrifically mutilated. The person there commented, "You nearly got yourself killed." He started some kind of restorative process for the other body, and we talked for a while. I asked him questions about where I had been, what had happened, and he answered freely. I was never allowed to look at him though. All I remember is him saying, "You have multiple bodies. One of them, your dream body, was destroyed. If you had stayed any longer, the rest of them would have been killed as well." At the end, he said something like, "I am sorry, but I can't let you remember most of this." I then woke up again, rolled over to make sure I was awake, but was still stuck with the feeling that something had followed me back from the dream. I began digging into the feeling, and I suddenly realized I had an entire set of someone else's memories. I rolled onto my back and moved around a bit, just to make sure I was actually awake, and began digging into the memories. The place I had been was not human-made. It had been created ages ago by the last sentient species that had lived on Earth. They had become very advanced, but had descended into dark technology, attempting to control spiritual forces with technology. They had also begun worshipping evil things. The city was a research city where they ran large-scale experiments, and some time ago, they had unleashed something which had killed their entire species. Humanity had discovered them long ago, but the governments had kept info about them under wraps. We had found that city back in the 40s or 50s and had moved in to repurpose it for our research. Recently, we had discovered their final project, and for some reason had started to try activating it again. The memories belonged to an archaeologist who had been sent there to study the city but who had ended up dying to the thing which I had encountered. I did some mental digging and came up with a name which I can't remember now, but I remember it feeling warm and familiar for some reason. I then was overwhelmed by the feeling that something had followed me back, and saw a flash of a monstrous-looking person with goat legs in the distance. I slapped myself in the face to make sure I was awake, then decided I needed to sleep it off. Closing my eyes, I got another flash. This time, the thing was right in my face, eye to eye with me. I startled, spent a few minutes browsing my phone to reset, then rolled onto my side to try to fall asleep. About that time, my top side started feeling damp and cold. It was summer, my sheets were dry, and I couldn't figure out why. As I drifted back off to sleep, the feeling that something had followed me back persisted, and I started feeling like these thoughts aren't my own. Suddenly, I had another flash of a dream. I saw a maggot-like creature with translucent, sickly colored skin. It had a leech-like mouth with concentric rings of inwardly pointing teeth, 2 black pincers at its mouth, and wispy tendrils ending in knots of fibrous, bleeding red strands like a starfish's stomach. The image then shifted. I was looking at myself in the third person, and the creature, about 3 feet long, was laying atop my side, the side which felt cold and numb. The 2 wispy tendrils were extended over me and sunk into my skull, and somehow I knew that this thing had latched onto me somehow in a dream and was feeding off my mind. Finally, I had enough and got out of bed. Didn't try going back to sleep for hours, but thankfully that was the last of that dream sequence.
Dreamed there was a Samara grudge-looking demon at the side of my bed. She was trying to crawl into my ear. I was trying to say begone, but it was really hard to speak. Eventually she got in, and then for a week after that in real life, I had the flu. Next 2 weren't that scary at the moment, but pretty intense. A lot of my dreams are like these violent conflicts with weird situations. Typed them up the morning after, so forgive the groggy grammar. Last night I dreamed that I was in a house with a bunch of my family, and when we were moving furniture around and found a rosary, which prompted me to say I'm not Catholic, but I know they don't like this, and I grabbed some flashlights and me and my aunt went down into the basement to confront the demons we found, and were trying to exorcise this one female grudge ghost-looking demon, and I was having a hard time speaking for a while, but eventually I was able to get words out, and I think we took care of that one. Then we went further into the basement, and I apparently blacked out because I woke up back upstairs in the house, and all I remember is images of the big boar, bison-headed demon thing, huge head, minotaur-like, down there, which had apparently chased us out. So we gathered the goons. I got my 300 blackout. My uncle got his SIG. Other uncle had that 5.7 Kel-Tec with the P90 mags. Aunt and wife were also there. I stuffed my pockets with more flashlights, and we went down into the basement to find kill exorcise the thing. The basement had turned into this big long sewer dungeon thing we were going to have to explore like it was a video game. And then unfortunately I woke up because the dogs were barking. Dream 2. Went to the snowy mountains with a couple people that aren't real for camping. And this invincible giant gorilla would come out of this hatch that led underground, and we kept having to go back in time to try to beat it. Shooting it didn't work. Eventually one of our people got hit with some spiky mace thing, and me and the other 1 or 2 people ran away trying to hide as we ran. Ended up in my old yard thinking we got away, but there it came down the alley. So I ran and climbed up a tree, and the cops came because the neighbors called about me being in their tree, but they then turned their attention to the gorilla. I tried setting it on fire, and that slowed it down for a little bit. The cops and SWAT and military were there fighting it, and somebody took me and the people from my group in a van, and we drove a bit away while they were fighting it, and I think winning. And the people in the van who saved us had magic, science powers. They showed us a bone piece from our friend that got clobbered and left in the mountains, and said she isn't actually dead. We can bring her here pretty easily without having to go back there. So they had this big metal barrel vat thing like the kind you'd see a hobo have a campfire in. About chest high. It was full of red water and bones. So I did the logical thing and reached in and grabbed hair, pulled out our clobbered but now healthy friend, who happened to be young Winona Ryder. And then I woke up.
When I remember waking up being scared, shaking because of this dream where I moved into this haunted house. Beautiful place, but the basement is where I made my home. For some reason I knew and didn't know it was a dream. I knew I had lived there before at some point and it was haunted, but I didn't really know. It had this weird setup, somewhat like a Victorian house with 2 separate wings that on the roof above each had a large cone, and then the middle was the hallway until you reached the basement, which had a large open glass door leading to a small slope that you walked up until you once again reached ground level. There was also a massive abandoned tesseract cube-like room made of pure concrete with steel beams I played on as a kid despite a few seconds before and after being a full-grown man who bought the house. Anyways, the basement was the demon's nest. It was full of the previous owner's shit. A grand piano, boxes of old magazines and clothes. Once emptied out, I put my bed down there with my wife, who didn't have a face or voice but just kind of existed. The thing would walk around your bed when you weren't there or were gone, and it would leave large water-stained footprints like the episode of Creepshow where the people come back to kill the mobster who drowned them. There was also an infinite staircase that spiraled upwards, and you would literally go insane if you went too far up there. It led to the spiral cone thing, but no one made it to the top because it seemed to go on forever. No matter how far you went up, you never reached the top, but you could quickly just turn around and then be back at the base level even if you walked up a million stairs before. There was so much to the atmosphere and the feeling of constantly being watched and knowing something evil lived there that screwed me up. I've had others before too. I went almost a full year with nothing but nightmares. 0 has positively affected my dreams in all ways except one case. Whenever I have a nightmare, I just find a way to kill myself and then everything is fixed. It's almost like me saying F you to my mind. Not all my nightmares are scary either, some are just very, very stressful. Like you get so stressed you end up waking yourself up. These involve money, committing a crime that was justified but not wanting to get caught. arguing or fighting with people who don't seem to work on logic. The one dream that messed with me was a blur that I knew didn't make sense, but it was very zero state of mind. It was me trying to stop this FBI-like organization from killing my family and friends, but they were always one step ahead of me no matter how hard I tried or how many times I reset the timeline. I've had dreams where I'm scared of something but I don't know what. I just know something is there, seeing me, thinking about me, standing just behind me or out of the corner of my eye, but I can never actually see it or feel it. The unknown monster that drives you to insanity until you're screaming and ready to murder people who don't believe that something is in fact there because it's stressing you out and scaring you so much. I have one universe I dreamed of for quite a while. I live in one of the largest cities in America. In this world, everything was crunched down into a small town. What would take me an entire day and a half of walking I can do in 10 minutes. I tried to map it out in Minecraft once so I could explain it, but no matter how I tried to do it, nothing made sense geographically. Neither did the timeline. I could be an 8-year-old in one and then an 18-year-old in the next. One dream I had and really liked was where these aliens from alternate dimensions came to us. They split our universe in half so they could more easily control it. In the alien dream, when they first invaded, I climbed up a long metal tube-like ladder structure to the top of a large dome building. I looked out at the most beautiful thing ever. It was the destruction of mankind, but I couldn't help but smile. The entire city was on fire, which lit up the night sky. This gorgeous green gas was swirling around the streets, and these large Zeppelin blimps were what the aliens were using to travel, and they covered the sky. They were the size of small cities, each of them, and they had ropes dangling from them. In that same dream, with some help, I was able to cross the barrier into the other dimension to save my brother. The thing about the aliens is that they would fill the half of the universe missing with themselves shape-shifting. So you could think it was your mom you were talking to, but your real mom was in the other universe and you're talking to an alien. I saved my brother and his mom, my stepmom and our grandma were there. But I knew she was an alien, and when she tried to call the control on me, I thrust my arm back and cracked open one of their skulls like a grape and sent their green blood and gray skin everywhere. I caved in the other skulls too, so they must have been physically weak when shape-shifting, because as aliens nothing hurt them. The dream went nowhere really. Millions of years passed and we were trapped in our never-decaying or aging bodies. They farmed humans until eventually another universe came in with tech equal to theirs, and they had an epic battle I got to help out in via sabotage in the main human farm. I have a few more, so if anyone is interested I'll post more tomorrow if work is slow. I need to go to bed right now since I'm going to be waking up in 7 hours.
My least favorite nightmares are the ones that feel like they take all night, so long that I'm genuinely surprised when I wake up to reality, no longer being consumed by soul-sucking chaos. Speaking of soul-sucking chaos, that's more or less the last one I can remember clearly, as if my entire existence was slowly shredded before my eyes, and myself left outside, far from home. All the lights suddenly cut out, and a horde of vicious strangers begins bearing down on me from all directions. Everyone knows what's happening to me, no one cares. The setting for this dream was not far from my actual home, but the place itself was half illogical, as if described by someone who never actually saw it. There were glimpses of demonic hallucinations, but they seemed photoshopped in. Badly. All of this amounted to me understanding that, whatever this nightmare was attempting to impress upon me, was an enormous lie. Thanks for playing, demons.
Once I had this really vivid torture dream, where I was in hell or something like it. It was just a void. The only noise I could hear was my own screams and meat noises as I was torn apart and smashed by things I couldn't see. In the dream I can see everything both from my own point of view and from a separate point of view floating around watching myself. All at the same time I see and feel all my limbs being broken and torn off like I'm a fly or spider, while my torso is punched in and then ripped open, all the contents being removed in large handfuls by invisible hands. My emptied torso is crushed into pulp. It looks like it happens from every direction at once, and my head is wrenched violently from the remainder, with enough force involved that one of my eyes pops out. All the other parts are shredded as they get torn away, as if they were being thrown into a wood chipper or the like. Reduced to particles. It's like I'm being erased. I watch and feel my own head ripped in half, and the two halves smashed and melded back together into a lump of skull shards and leaky meat before it disappears too, shredded or vaporized. In the total darkness of the void I can't tell which of my views is which, until suddenly I'm restored, fully, clothes and all, then it all starts again. I lost track of how many times. It felt like one of those dreams where you live a whole life, where you meet the love of your life and have children, and it feels like you've lived 40 years in a night. Woke up soaked in sweat, piss, and started throwing up before I could even make it out of the bed.
I have had vivid nightmares my entire life. I've lucidly lived through hundreds of apocalypses. I've met gods, aliens, demons, visited other planets, and traveled through alternate dimensions. I've lived within dreams 1,000 lives, awakening to another dream. I've had dreams in which I traveled from one dream world to another via multidimensional technology that enabled me to traverse infinite planes of existence until I reached one in which all was made of variations of myself. I've been to hell 1,000 times and back again. I started recording my nightly dreams last August and I already have over 1,000 pages. Some nights I have 3 to 4 dreams, each ranging from an event lasting an hour to some an entire lifetime. But by far the worst, most horrific dreams I've had are the following 3, which I don't even want to explain in detail, because my heart hurts thinking of them. 1. 2 dreams. My grandmother was trapped, after having recently died in a hell plane, and a demonic entity was posing as my grandmother, wearing her flesh like a costume. The entity had trapped me in a realm where I was forced to awaken 16 times. Each time it was so precisely a mirror of this reality I couldn't be sure I was awake until thoroughly checking the house for signs of mistakes in the simulation. And each time I awoke, the demonic presence made me find an even worse image of my grandmother suffering or dead, or being inhabited by the demon itself. When I finally awoke from the dream within dream I cursed and screamed. I was so angry and horrified. I can't explain the torture I went through, and the images I was made to witness. I don't want to. 2. The CIA/military had found a wormhole to an alternate timeline accessible via digital means, its entrance being activated via the use of a cell phone and IP address. Multiple agents had attempted to visit the realm and return but were either broken upon return from what they experienced/witnessed or refused to return. The complexity of this one is difficult to describe briefly, but I'll just summarize the most horrific part. I had entered this alternate timeline in Oaxaca, Mexico. There was a cafe downtown, in a neighborhood run by what was once demonic royalty and had evolved into a sort of local cartel. A neighborhood gang. They were a cannibalistic demonic group, and their favorite snack was the scalps of victims, cooked in an oil-like substance. I entered the cafe through the rear, an alleyway, and watched and listened to the conversations of a demon being tattooed by another demon. The markings on his flesh were signifiers of his status as collector, who brought those to be scalped. He was eating soup off the scalp of a recent victim. The demon tattooing him was legless and had arms which went from flesh to bone, with one arm bearing a needlepoint tip out of which his blood acted as ink, tattooing the demon talking. He was bragging about his ability to handle his job, and how he enjoyed watching his victims squirm. They had found a way to grow the scalps and flesh of victims back a certain number of times, so only X amount of flesh food was needed per week, more or less depending on consumption. In front was a busy street. Young women walked by and I wondered how they felt safe here. Back in the cafe I went to exit, return home. Exited past the tattooed man seated on a stool and into the alley. A woman was throwing out garbage. I asked her how to leave. She said the bus arrives every X hours, you have 1 minute to get in, and when you get in, you must not look at any of the passengers, but I could talk to the driver, or you will be forced to endure the entire transportation and be brought back here. She also said between where we stood and the alley was a room, it sometimes appeared to be a church, typically whatever people leaving felt safe in, and I must not enter it no matter how appealing or I would be feasted on for eternity. She ran me to the train/bus through the dark, wet alley, and I saw the room like a church interior she mentioned, with bright colors. It appeared safe unlike where I was running. The bus door swung open after arriving like a train with bright blinding lights. The driver was absolutely horrific. She was a conglomeration of cannibalized flesh, fat, and gore, sewn together without string, as if it were all growing parts of different humans latched onto her, and she was fat, her face was many people's faces, and she explained to me the same rules as the woman who ran me there. I knew, I felt, and in the corner of my eye, saw the presence of what can only be described as the most horrific, unsettling, uncomfortable entity I have ever witnessed. I sat down, and I knew it was behind me. To make not looking more difficult, there were mirrors everywhere. Besides the demon behind me, the bus was empty. The bus driver spoke to me about how she became a driver. After being a victim for many years, she was tired of being eaten and asked to join, so they gave her flesh and made her driver. I asked her how long the ride was, and she said it was an eternity, of course. We had many stops. She has yet to see anyone leave the bus home. All end up back in the alley and enter the church like she did. This is where it got psychotic. If everything wasn't bad enough already, the demon behind me was breathing on me at first, tickling me. I could feel it caressing my back, the hairs on my body, as if it could touch the tiniest particle of electricity behind me to make me know its presence physically. And it slowly got closer and closer. And it laughed silently. I could feel it smile. I knew it had razor-sharp rows of teeth. Then I started to feel it touch my back like someone was poking me with their finger. But instead of a finger, it was like a needle, ever so slowly piercing me. And as the needle got deeper, the pain spread, and time slowed down. And I could feel my organs on fire. I could see my entire life flashing before me in cycles. I could see visions of the demon and everyone he had touched before me. I couldn't scream, I couldn't move. I was paralyzed and I was being torn to shreds internally, like 1,000 daggers or claws were ripping me apart and tearing me to pieces, and then moving back in time and repairing me and repeating the process. It was like an electric fire of knives and mallets assaulting my internal organs. If that weren't hell enough, it was as if this pain that was physically spread to a spiritual pain. And an emotional pain. The deepest sadness and regret and depression and horror I have ever felt. Cycled on and off, forward and back in time. All while I could feel the point of penetration being the smiling demon seated behind me, reflected in a mirror in front of me as a demonic bus driver told me about her vacation. The demon pulled out the poking finger and we arrived at our first stop. In a different city. It had only been 10 minutes or so. There I was, on this bus, riding through a hell dimension of Mexico. And it just continued to get worse. My father got on the bus. And he didn't recognize me. And I couldn't tell him not to look. And I know he looked. And I felt as his soul and essence was siphoned out of him into the demon behind me, who put its finger back on my back, should say spleen or liver. It was like the lower back side, an organ. And I could see in my pain my father suffering eternally. I don't recall how I left or woke up. But I never want to return to that place. And to even attempt to describe the feeling of being touched in that manner is impossible. So y'all who don't have nightmares, be glad. I deal with this shit every night, since childhood.
My entire life was a televised sim, and the show finale was me being shoved into a tube before a live audience and mulch. Then another me came out of a cloning vat. My memories were wiped and another season started. Sounds neat, but was kinda scary.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel, as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.